All right, there we go. Okay, welcome to Monday Night Movie Talk. I'm yours truly, the MovieDude Eric. Welcome back to a new episode. We're talking Valentine's Day, so obviously we've got to talk about a little love. And of course, when we're talking about love in the movies, we got to talk about the romantic comedy. So today we're going to talk about the highs and lows. We're going to talk about the ins, the outs of the romantic comedy, also known as the rom-com. And I got a special guest with us to talk about that in just a moment. But before we get there, we got to go ahead and get started with our weekly rundown. So let's go ahead and let's get into that. Okay, so first off, let's talk about the new release that I got to see this weekend, which was Death on the Nile. This is Kenneth Branagh coming back to do his Hercule Poirot character once again after Murder on the Orient Express. And I gotta say, I actually think this one's a lot better than the Murder on the Orient Express, probably because I'm way too familiar with that one. I've seen the old movie a few times. This one, I actually hadn't seen the Death on the Nile original, so there was that. But I gotta say though, it feels like that Kenneth Branagh feels more comfortable in the role. He's got a really good cast here. I like the fact that there's some twists and turns that kind of go away from the usual kind of PBS elements of these kind of Agatha Christie type stories. I really enjoyed the secondary characters here, and quite honestly, it's just a very fun little murder mystery. Not as fun as, let's say, like Knives Out and stuff like that, but if you just need a couple of hours to chill and you want to just enjoy a good time, this is a pretty decent movie. So I'm gonna say, if you get a chance, check it out. Not something, maybe it's not something you want to run out to the theaters for, but when it hits the streaming services, it's worth a couple hours of your time. All right, so the other one I want to talk about is South Pacific. I've actually never seen South Pacific before. Doesn't really on my radar, but recently I had gotten a chance to see the stage production here in Houston, and so I was kind of curious. So I went back and I watched the movie, and I gotta say, yikes. I mean, I kind of see some of the love for South Pacific a little bit, but it is kind of a little creepy in areas, and some of the performances don't age very well, and yeah, it wasn't as fun as I was hoping. I mean, I don't know. Rodgers and Hammerstein probably is they definitely show their kinks a little bit here, But I will say though that this is a beloved stage musical. I get it. Maybe this is just not for me. I mean, it was well directed, and I gotta say Ray Walston did a really good job as kind of the, how do I put it, the schmuck of the crew. So there is that, but honestly, it wasn't really my cup of tea, but I can understand why people enjoy it. So South Pacific, maybe a little overrated. All right, now, before we get into our episode, I do want to mention the untimely passing of Ivan Reitman, a director that I've been familiar with almost my entire life as a huge Ghostbusters fan. Anyone who listened to my Art House Legends podcast on Ghostbusters know that I have nothing but respect for Ivan Reitman, and we will be dedicating this episode of Monday Night Movie Talk to the legacy of Ivan Reitman. And of course, he has been known to do a rom-com or two in his time, so we will be talking more about him later on. But now, I really want to get our guest on the show. He is the host of the Dads Does Rom-Com podcast. Hello. Things are going crazy. All right, give me a second. So at this point, I want to welcome Christian Lee of the Dads Does Rom-Coms podcast onto the show. Christian, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How about yourself?
I am doing wonderful, with the exception, of course, that one of my favorite filmmakers has passed away. So there is that sadness that I'm having a little bit about that right now. But
yeah, he's a master.
But I am curious though, because we're bringing you on for a discussion on rom-coms, and you do a podcast called Dad Does Rom-Coms. What's your familiarity with the rom-com?
Well, I mean, I'm going on my 27th year of marriage, so it's ingrained in me to watch rom-coms. But even as a kid, I mean, I loved a good rom-com. When I was a kid, of course, I loved Star Wars. I loved Indiana Jones and all that. But all of those movies had comedic romance in them. Mm-hmm. Ivan Reitman was the king of that. Stripes, yes, it was a comedy on its face, but there was always the romance behind the scenes or driving the scenes. So, I mean, I don't think you can have a good comedy without romance, in my opinion.
I agree. I absolutely agree with that. And in a way, I mean, as we'll talk about in just a little bit, um, rom-coms are a staple of Hollywood all the way back to the silent era. That it was a staple of Hollywood productions. So I am kind of curious though, what kind of rom-coms do you think make for the what are your favorite types of rom-coms? I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, I think it's got to balance everything. It can't just be ridiculous slapstick comedy the whole time. You have to believe the romance, the chemistry between the two main characters, or else it falls flat on all counts. So if you don't believe there's chemistry there, it falls flat as a romance. If it you doesn't have good jokes, it doesn't have great timing, then it falls flat on the comedy. And I think that's why most romantic comedies maybe not fail, but don't succeed where other movies can, because you have to perfectly balance those two. And I appreciate movies that do that, which is why I started doing a podcast about rom-coms.
All right. So before we get into a deep dive discussion on the rom-com, I do feel like the film nerd in me has to kind of bring up a few things that I some observations, so to say, about rom-coms, and kind of to start this off with a little bit of a maybe not a history lesson, but definitely kind of a way an observational regarding
Sure.
the rom-com. So at this point, I feel like we need to ask the question, what makes a rom-com? Now, before I give my take, Christian, what makes a rom-com?
Well, I mean, like I said, you do have to have chemistry between leads, but like when we are talking about Ivan Reitman, is Ghostbusters a rom-com? I mean, at its core, it's a silly movie about guys busting ghosts, but if you didn't have the Sigourney Weaver character there, what do you have? You know, Trading Places, there's Jamie Lee Curtis, and that's part of the romance there. But is the rom-com between Jamie Lee Curtis and Dan Aykroyd, or is the romance between Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd? See, that's the thing. It's all shades of gray, to steal the name of a horrible movie. It's the characters, falling in love with each other, and in turn, the audience falling in love with them. So it doesn't have to be the classic, oh, guy bumps into girl, silly trope beginning the movie. At Dad Does Rom-Coms, I always point out tropes. We play crazy sound bites whenever we run into the tropes. And the movies have almost become just a trope factory at this point, and it's really hard to find an original rom-com that does something different and doesn't just rehash. And I think that's the most disappointing thing about rom-coms now, is that they're not necessarily breaking new ground. And now that you've got channels devoted to what I would call is softcore rom-coms, the Hallmark channels and such,
Yeah.
It's not funny, it's not romantic, it's cookie cutter, and it's disappointing because there used to be some really good rom-coms. You don't get a When Harry Met Sally anymore, and that's a shame because it was a great movie. Even as a kid, I recognized, like, this is art.
I understand. All right, so for me, what makes a rom-com is obviously you have to have a partnership in between two characters. And one thing that I feel that doesn't get a lot of appreciation when it comes to what makes a romantic comedy is the fact that that there's kind of a whole series of things that really kind of force the two characters to really internalize what they want in themselves. And that, in a way, the romantic comedies that I think really stick out are the ones that force characters to make decisions about who they are as people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I feel like I want to talk about the evolution of the rom-com before we get into the de-evolution, which we'll definitely be getting into, because especially over the last 20 years, the rom-com has fallen on hard times and is definitely ready for a revival, in my opinion. So, as I mentioned before, rom-coms actually started off in the silent era. There were actually romantic comedies that were in those very short first type films. The ones that were like 10 minutes long, 15 minutes long. Back when even before kind of movie theaters. When it was just a sideshow attraction. Romance was part of those types of shows. That said, as cinema kind of became an art form, when it became talkies and stuff like that, what was, and this is kind of the history aspect of it, over the course of the 20th century, societal norms were challenged throughout that 20th century, especially when it came to women's roles, because before, women were meant to be kind of in a specific bubble, and as women burst out of that bubble during World War I, World War II, the 50s and 60s, up into the 70s, and women's liberation, women's roles changed over the course of the 20th century, and as that was happening, the films caught that, and especially considering that romance is kind of always been considered a paramount or kind of a feature in women's lives, that rom-coms found this as an opportunity to talk about women in a way that is that is both kind of traditional, but at the same time allows for people to kind of get a better insight. And sex became less taboo and was allowed to be more complicated in the media. Back in the early 20th century, you couldn't say sex. In fact, there was a whole code about not having sex in movies. They had to be very careful about even broaching, like even kissing amongst unmarried people was not accepted. But as the 20th century went along, you started to see that media was allowed to discuss and dive deeper into sex, and of course, because with talking about sex, we had to talk about dating and talking about mating rituals and stuff like that, and with that, rom-coms had an opportunity to poke fun at it and able to give it a little bit of a lighthearted jab. And so it was able to kind of tackle these more hardcore themes in a more lighthearted way that's a little bit more accessible to people who maybe not don't feel comfortable talking about very deep and uncomfortable aspects of human nature, specifically with sex. Screenwriters found comedy in the awkwardness of dating. You start to see the guys like Preston Sturges. You start to see, it eventually would get to like Nora Ephron, and we'd see the likes of Simon Curtis coming out and kind of challenging kind of the dating scene, and kind of taking aspects of who I think is the original rom-com queen, Jane Austen, and finding ways to introduce that through screenplays and being able to have fun with the Jane Austen stereotypes and tropes, and in a way also kind of dissecting and evolving those things that Jane Austen had originally started with. And finally, due to the cost-effective cookie-cutter aspect of rom-coms, they were easy to be made on TV. And you start to see, in fact, you could start seeing rom-coms on television as far back as the 1950s. And of course, with the movies of the week, 1980s and 1990s, it started to become, it started to be more prominent. In fact, Hallmark, before they had their own channel, like every month or so, they would have like a Hallmark movie of the month, where it would be a rom-com or something romance-based, specifically in order to target women viewers and kind of focusing on them specifically. And that's where the evolution of the rom-com kind of come in, and how we got to that point in the, I would say, early 2000s. And I feel like there is one movie that we could say was the was at the peak of rom-com. And I'll mention what that movie is in just a bit, because I feel like we need to get to that point. But there's that one movie, I feel like after that it was over. The rom-com, it was a spiral downhill all the way after this particular movie. And I think you know which one. I honestly feel like you know this one. But we'll get to it in just a moment. But what do you think about that evolution, though? Do you feel that that's kind of in the right direction, or do you feel like I'm missing something?
No, I think the Jane Austen novels definitely. I mean, she used humor in her novels and the relationships with the characters. I think one step maybe that was missed is the radio teleplays. You know, Burns and Allen
You're right.
had a lot to do with that, which came up from the vaudeville days, and that spun into radio days. And then, so you had Burns and Allen on the radio, and then that evolved into Lucille Ball.
Boom.
And
You're right. I got
Lucille Ball was the first female production company, one of the largest production companies. CBS wouldn't exist without Lucille Ball. CBS was Lucille Ball.
Yeah.
You know, so what she created, they built upon. So those were two really strong, kick-ass women that always gave a back and forth, just rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat, machine gun hits. Now, granted, those were more stark comedies, but it always it always dealt with the husband dynamic and that kind of thing. So I think that those two women really drove the direction of romantic comedies. And then you had the musicals, you know, where there had to be something other than dancing, a little more than tap dancing going on. So they found the easiest thing to do was either hard melancholy or hard jokes. And I think that people were like, look, we don't come to a movie theater to see melancholy. We prefer the jokes. And I think escapism has a lot to do with romantic comedies. You know, it just can't all be grapes of wrath.
That's
You know, you need some laughs in your life. Everybody was dealing with that kind of stuff. You know, people were trying to scrape pennies together after the Dust Bowl. They didn't want to go and watch a sad movie. They wanted to see something with a little life in it. So they were watching musicals and romantic comedies. And some of the women that really drove that, those pioneers, kind of helped steer it in that direction. They weren't always in charge, and they weren't always the decision makers, but they were behind the scenes pushing for something that was a little more realistic.
No, you're right, and I honestly that I can't believe I completely ignored the impact of the musical, and and how it kind of evolved into the movie musical specifically. And I also think that there is a wish fulfillment aspect to the romantic comedy, because obviously when romantic comedies target themselves more towards women than to men, just because
Sure.
it always puts a charming, sweethearted guy, heart of gold. Maybe a little rough on the outside, but someone that you can, you dig a little deeper, and you see that kind of that softy in the hard shell. But I think it also kind of does target to men a little bit, because women in a romantic comedy are quirky, they're affectionate, they're kind of this kind of the manic pixie dream girl type
Yeah.
is pretty.
Yeah, it's a beautiful girl with boobs, and she gets
Well,
jokes.
it doesn't always
It's
have
all
to be
it's
boobs.
but you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like that, it's like not only is she stacked, she's witty too, And then there's also the fact that they're selling romantic comedies to guys as a way to take out women in real life.
Mhm.
So there's a reason that in the early 2000s, the romantic comedies became raunchier and raunchier, because they wanted to make sure that they got teenage boys in there. They wanted to make sure that they got 20 something guys in there. And they said, look, your girls want to go on a date. You want to take a girl out on a date. Here, it's something you're going to get to. We're going to push into raunch, even though female centric movies were as raunchy as possible in the early 2000s, because they were just like pushing it, seeing what they could do to push the limits. And I get that. They were trying to get as many people. At the end of the day, it's art. I get that. But studios want people in seats. And asses and seats is an important thing.
That's true.
And if they could really stretch a romantic comedy as much romance as they could and as much raunchy humor as they could, they were going to do that and try to get as many asses and seats as they could.
I agree completely. And I feel like there are some key aspects to the rom com that you have to have. These are the staples that you have to have with all rom coms. So the first is you got to have attractive people meeting cute. It has to be something memorable. It has to be something that highly implausible. Although I will say, when Harry Met Sally, I think kind of establishes they found a way to have your meet cute, but it seemed more plausible for it to
Yep.
happen. And I love the fact that they also added those extra kind of How I Met My Wife things in the middle of the throughout the film to kind of again hammer the point across. That this is something that is possible. All right, so the second thing that you have to have with a rom-com is you have obvious chemistry, often denied. It's like right off the bat, you know that these two are they should be together for some manner or form, but it's being denied by some particular thing. It could be internal, which is that they're both stubborn. Again, going back to Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen.
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare as well.
Yeah.
Or it could be external. And I think external is more of a Shakespeare thing. Shakespeare was more interested in, having two forces kind of,
but just that struggle.
keeping the lovers away. Rivals for affection are usually the typical external conflict. You might also say a Baxter, going to an underappreciated romantic comedy, if I may say so.
Definitely.
A character who is kind of meant to be there just to kind of signify, the obstacle in the way of the two lovers getting together. You're gonna have the refusal of Cupid's call. There's gonna be someone that's going to deny that this is a relationship, or they're going to walk away from that relationship for some manner or form. You're gonna have some sort of acceptance of affection. Which is going to be kind of the ending of the film, right? It's that I love you, and at that particular point, contract fulfilled with the audience, you got your romance. Congratulations. What do you think? Am I off on this? Am I missing a step?
No, those are in almost every single one, that's for sure. I think that a lot of the stuff from rom-coms has been around since some of the very first rom-coms. Mm-hmm. And then there was a real turn. The guy nobody likes to talk about anymore because it comes with so much baggage, but I try to leave all that alone and just focus on the art and the movies. Mm-hmm. Is the time Harry Met Sally wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for Woody Allen and his rom-coms. He took the classic rom-coms that, hey, we're talking to dames like this. Hey, how are you doing there? And then he took it and he was the guy that made them realistic. He did that 70s style. The same thing they were doing with Easy Rider and changing completely how movies were made with that movie. He did the same thing with romantic comedies, and he grounded them. He put in a schleppy looking guy, not always the brightest or shiniest woman. She was bright, but she wasn't shiny. It wasn't always the stacked witty woman. It was just the witty woman. And we're like, oh my goodness, this could work. And he definitely grounded all of the glam and glitz and rom-coms. And that allowed us to have movies like When Harry Met Sally and allowed them to be a little dirtier and things like that. He brought in dirt and he brought in filth to the rom-com scene. And if it wasn't for Woody Allen, I'm sure it would have happened eventually, but it wouldn't have happened the same way. Billy Crystal wouldn't have made the movies that he chose to make and write if it hadn't been for people like Woody Allen changing the genre like he did. And I think we owe him a lot for that, despite all the other stuff.
I definitely get where you're going with that. I also feel like Woody Allen, in a way, parodied the rom-com. I feel like
sure
that in a way he has a deep respect for Preston Sturges, and I'm going to keep going back to Preston Sturges because in my opinion he is the first filmmaker about the rom-com. He was with Palm Beach Story, with the Lady Eve. He was the guy who really kicked it off. You could also say Ernest Lubitsch if you want to go a little bit further. To Be or Not to Be, let's be honest, that is one hell of a rom-com right there. With Nazis of all things, gotta give it to him. He was able to pull that off.
If you can't pull off Nazis in your rom-com, what are you even doing?
I'm just saying. And let's just put it this way: even Mel Brooks couldn't really pull it off like Ernest Lubitsch did. And he remade To Be or Not to Be, so that's saying something. But at the same time, I feel like what Woody Allen did was he parodied that. He was like, everyone, you had the really, the good looking guy, the gorgeous woman, and what he did was that because he put himself in the role of the guy,
right,
and clearly every woman that is in his romances is clearly over his league. He is, they're way out of his league. And so, he's making fun of himself and his own insecurities.
Yeah, he is. But you could tell he had a love for the genre too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He definitely, and he made it better. And he made other people see some of the flaws in it and say, oh, well, we can work with that and we can make something just as funny, but grounded in a little more reality. The old rom-coms of the old days gone by, they were all, rich socialites, not all, but generally, it was all people of means, people of wealth. And then you started seeing rom-coms where, Kevin Smith style, where it was just people on the Jersey Shore, just maybe people that didn't have more than a couple nickels to rub together, not a lot of means, but you could still see the romance and the grit and the grime in there. And, that's those game changers that come along and kind of, even in making fun of a genre, twist it and change it and send it on a new trajectory. Yeah.
And you got a point there, because like if you go back to Preston Sturges and Ernest Lubitsch, those usually were about rich people who were who were courting each other in some manner or form, because they wanted glitz and glamour. They wanted to make sure to have something visually appealing. And back then, the way they saw it was that, well, you need to have something shiny. With black and white, clearly, it's going to be very difficult to bring some shine to that. But the idea is that it has to be glitzy and glamorous, and it has to kind of have this awe factor, because otherwise people are not going to care
right
in the way that they see it. And so when you do get to Woody Allen and you have this kind of more indie aspect to the rom-com, you definitely start to see that. Although, in my opinion, when the quintessential working person's rom-com, we got to talk Moonstruck. Moonstruck, in my opinion, is the quintessential working class rom-com, right?
I could see that. I mean, there's a definitely argument to be made. Not my favorite, but I understand. I mean, it totally meets, it hits all of those points, and yeah, that's a good one.
And of course, with it being directed by another indie filmmaker, with Norman Jewison, again, he brings that aspect to it, and he finds a way to make it really, to give it some weight and gravitas.
Right.
All right, so let's talk about some of the do-nots, some stuff that you cannot do, the third rail of the rom-com, right? These are the things that you do not do in a rom-com. Number one, there will be no righteous indignation of trespasses, right? You cannot have it where someone is upset with someone for a righteous reason in a rom-com, because again, that breaks that whole spell of, if the guy's a complete psychopath, you do not want these two together. You want,
right.
If you seriously worry about the safety of the people that are involved with one another, you got to get away from it. Get away from it. Right?
Yeah.
So that's...
Yeah. Well, that's where they've successfully created Lifetime murder romance.
That's
a whole channel for that. I mean, that's what that is.
Okay, you know what?
They took a failed rom-com premise and turned it into a channel of murder romances, and it's murder porn. That's it.
That's true, but I will say that both me and my girlfriend, we do have an affinity for bad Lifetime murder comedy,
Oh,
murder rom.
it's the
Because
worst.
in my opinion, they are hilarious. Not
Oh no,
for
they're
no,
funny, but not for the right
that's right,
reasons.
that's true. But given the right circumstances, they are comedy gold. Like you can have so much fun. In fact, we have a bingo card for these Lifetime movies. Like there are rules to a Lifetime murder rom com,
Right.
I might actually put it somewhere online because, in my opinion, with that bingo card, you'll have so much fun with it because you're just looking
All,
for it. Like
a game I play is just pull up the guide on your television and just start reading the titles of the next 10 movies because they play them in blocks.
hmm
Just read the titles in one long run on sentence and it becomes another Lifetime murder romance
that's
movie.
true. All right, so there will be no righteous indignation of trespasses in a rom com. The second thing that you cannot have in a rom com is fights cannot be over important things. This is kind of an extension of number one, but at the same time, if let's say money, right?
Right.
If money is an issue in this relationship, it's too real. Most relationships get bogged down in money, and the last thing you want is on date night to be thinking, man, my partner is spending my money like crazy and it's annoying the hell out of me. You don't want that in your rom-com. If they come out of it actually thinking about their own relationships, you failed.
Right.
You
Yeah, it's this the three's company rule, you know. There's a misunderstanding,
mm-hmm.
but nothing can be really wrong.
That's true.
You know, oh, he accidentally fell into bed with her. I mean, we're not talking about rape,
Yeah.
but he bumped in and fell, you know, it has to be a misunderstanding, not a wrongdoing. I agree with you there.
And understand that, especially in my as we're looking back at older rom-coms and those that were of a certain blue period, in the 70s and 80s, including several of Woody Allen's movies. Uh, you start to realize that there's something very, very creepy going on here. That has a tendency of spoiling a perfectly good rom com. So you have to be careful about having too much reality in your rom com. There has to be a sense of fantasy. In a way, rom coms are a more modern day fantasy movie. All right.
Yeah, sure.
So the third, sex cannot be strictly casual. That is kind of like the scream rule of rom-coms when it comes to sex. It can never be casual. It has to be linked to certain emotional aspects, because even when they say it's strictly casual, you go with your no strings attached. You go with your When Harry Met Sally. It's gotta be something more. That just the fact that these two people have gotten together, and if they have sex outside of that relationship, that is extremely that is a trespass, right? You can that particular point is something that is going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get over.
Sounds right.
All right. And finally, both sides cannot be in their right minds at all times.
Yeah,
One can
I
be
would agree
allowed.
with that. Yes.
One can be in their right mind. The other one can be completely crazy. Not both sides. It cannot be strictly logical. It cannot be strictly that everyone's thinking that everyone's has their brain in the right place. Rom-coms, at least one of them have to be off their rockers.
Sounds about right.
All right. So, am I missing? Are there any other faux pas that I have not addressed?
No, I think you nailed it with the last one. Like somebody always has to be off kilter, and that is a key in a rom com. You know, if everybody was playing it straight, then you're just looking at a boring romance movie, which there's a place for.
Yeah.
But you know, even the most flat romantic movies have humor injected in them. So yes, you're right. Somebody's always off kilter. That's a really good one.
Well, the thing is that with any kind of romance, there's got to be some laughs. I don't know if any like even realistic romances where that there's not a sense of humor.
Well, everybody thinks they're funny.
Yeah.
I traveled as a comic for years, and everybody thinks they're funny.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to tell you they're wrong, but everybody thinks they're funny. Plenty of people had that opinion about me. There's, I guess, a reason I don't still do it. No, that's because I had 4 kids, but it's that's because I bought a couple off the black market. But anyway, yeah, everybody wants to think that they're funny. Everybody has a joke in the back of their mind that if you really pushed them for it and said, tell me a joke. So everybody wants to think that they have a witty connection with this other person. And sometimes you eat dinner with those people and you realize, no, you're a dullard. You're a horrible. But they want to think that they have that banter, when a lot of times it's really just office references. Sadly.
Fair enough. All right. So out of curiosity, when it comes to the rules, is there any rom-coms that you can think of that break the rules and that are still good? Because there's always going to be that exception, right?
Yeah, I think the ones like when Amy Poehler made the why am I blanking on the name?
They came together?
They came together. It has to be a movie making fun of the genre, I think, for it to break the rules, then remake the rules. The stuff that Woody Allen did, Kevin Smith stuff, where he, I think, broke some of the rules of rom-coms and then changed what they were. I think he's another game changer that for our generation, our Woody Allen in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are the key movies. I think you go back to the people that changed the way the movies are. You put aside what you don't like about them. You put aside what you know about them, and just look at the movies that they made and how they turned them and turned the whole genre into something different. And I think those are the guys that you go after and watch those movies.
Now, here's a question that I have before we get into the de-evolution a little bit. What's your position on bromances being rom-coms?
I mean, I think they are. I think The Rundown is probably as much of a rom-com as any movie. Sean William Scott and The Rock, before everybody was gaga over The Rock. Mm-hmm. The Rundown and Christopher Lambert and Mario Van Peebles have a rom-com. I mean, they're rom-coms. That's all they are.
Yeah.
It's a romantic comedy. It's a will they, won't they? It's Diane and Cheers. I mean, it's a rom-com. Guys don't want to think that, but it is. I would go as far as saying as Lethal Weapon is a rom-com. It really, because it's about those two characters. Mm-hmm. More than anything. It's about those two characters. And the back and forth, them meeting, them hating each other, them loving each other, them sticking together against all others, against all odds. At its core, yes, it's a bromance, but what is a bromance but us making ourselves feel better about watching romance? They're rom-coms.
Fair enough. All right, so let's talk about the de-evolution. What caused the de-evolution? And before I get into the causes of the de-evolution, I do want to bring up the pinnacle. What I think is the rom-com that finally destroyed rom-coms. And feel free to argue with me on this one.
No, go ahead. Give me your movie.
The movie, I think that was it. The one that reached the top and everything has come down ever since is Love Actually.
Oh, wow. You hate Love Actually.
No. I love Love Actually. I watch it every Christmas because, in my opinion, it is the height and the low. It is both the quintessential, well, they call it the ultimate romantic comedy, and I do agree with that. I feel like after Love Actually, there is no other place you can go but down. But let's also be honest here. It is also its own parody, if you think about it.
Sure, I see that. I mean, I recognize all of the faults and flaws of that movie. But I will tell you this. The movie didn't have people jumping up and down about the stalking and this and that until a couple of years later, somebody was like, well, that's weird. And then another year, they're like, well, this scene's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And then 3 or 4 more years, it's like, well, this is just unacceptable. And how much of it was unacceptable of its time, or how much of it has become unacceptable of our current time?
That's true.
So
But here's the thing about Love
I
Actually.
get what you're.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is a parody of itself, or a parody of the genre. But I think that everything it did right, it did great.
I agree, but here's the thing that I found interesting, and again, I watch it every year with "It's a Wonderful Life," which which anyone who's listened to that particular podcast knows I have deep affection for.
Right.
But I
And
watched.
it's flawed. It's crazily flawed. And I love the movie.
Yeah,
It's got tons of problems.
well, it's. I'll fight you on that one. But all right, but getting back to Love Actually. So here's the thing that I find out every time I watch it, every year I watch Love Actually, there's something I really notice. You know, as much as people have ribbed on Love Actually, I want to say as far back as 2005, it became kind of the movie that it was considered like one of the trashiest romantic comedies of all time.
Sure.
Like it got a bad reputation almost out the gate, even though it's still considered one of the biggest romantic comedies. But that said, as I watched the film, I realized, and every year I've watched the film, Love Actually knew what it was. It knew the criticisms, and it said F you to all of the criticisms before the criticisms came out. It dares us to call it out on its cheese. It dares us to call it trash, because in a way it knows that it's trash a little bit, but it also heightens it. It elevates it to a point, and it gives us exactly what we want out of a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it gave everybody exactly what they wanted. And I mean, then it spawned the movies like Valentine's Day and New Year's Eve. Oh,
no,
those
those are pale in comparison. And actually, that brings me to the evolution.
Sure.
Because and as much as I love me some Gary Marshall, all right, Gary Marshall, Pretty Woman, I still love Pretty Woman. I know that's problematic by today's standards, but
whatever. You can't judge movies today by but that's silly.
But Gary Marshall, Happy Days, the dude the dude knows comedy. Gotta give him that. Okay.
Yeah.
But the thing is he was chasing trends in the 2000s.
Definitely.
And in my opinion, everyone was chasing trends after Love Actually, because at that particular point, everything had been done. All right, we've had with the exception of gay rom-coms. I feel like that was the one place that no one wanted to go, and that was the one place that was ready for. I feel like that would have been the next great thing to come out of rom-coms, is to go LGBT and to dive into that. We had. Have you gotten a chance to see what was it, Happiest Season? Or
no, I haven't seen Happiest Season yet.
In my opinion, that was an attempt at doing the rom-com with an LGBT kick. Partially, it was good. The problem was it made the mistake of getting too real in the relationship to the point where you didn't want the two together, and so you got this backlash on it. And I'm not going to give it to.
Well, I think the first queer rom-com attempt. And I mean, it's a stretch to call it, but I think it was Short Bus. I think that
Short Bus was just a celebration
John
of
Mitchell.
Sex.
It was, but there was still, you could tell, and because of what he's made since then, you could tell he was trying to put comedic scenes in there. But again, he didn't level everything out, and it ended up being just a small genre movie. But I think he really was trying to pull elements from rom-coms into there. It's just one example of something that didn't work really. And I get that it had real sex and there was all this kind of stuff, but he definitely was going for some straight up comedic scenes with a lot of those. And some of them worked. It's just some of them didn't.
It was very funny. I really like Short Bus. And in my opinion, it's one of those extremely underrated films.
Oh, it's a good movie. It just I think if he had been able to nail what he's been getting better at through the years, which is blending stuff a little more together so it's not just, hey, this is in your face. I think that really would have hit huge across bigger
You
audiences,
know what?
you know. But
I think we need to bring it back. All right.
sure.
I think today's audiences. I feel like if you reintroduce Short Bus to today's audiences, I actually think that it could in fact be bigger. I feel like this could be
Oh,
easily a cult
yeah.
classic rom com. And
Yeah.
let's be honest, we don't have enough cult classic rom coms in my opinion. I think Harold and Maude I think might be in that very small little room of cult classic rom coms. All right, but let's talk about the de-evolution. So obviously, we got to talk about the big ones in the room: Lifetime and Hallmark.
Sure.
I mean, first off, they've been around before the height. They were there practically from the beginning. Like I said about the Hallmark, TV movies of the month. They put it all out. I remember because every commercial, like they caught that 2 hour block, and they just put nothing but Hallmark commercials in between scenes of really bad acting with really big names, which is really weird. Lifetime, especially because it was either they were doing a rom com or they were doing someone, a man or a woman killing their partner. It had to be one or the other. And then, of course, as we talked about the merging of these two things into some of the greatest cinema of trash ever put to celluloid. But that's neither here nor there. So that was kind of the beginning of the de-evolution. It was there was a bit of a saturation element, and because again it was so cheap, rom-coms are cheap to make. All you have to
Very.
have is a very a milquetoast script. And because rom-coms are very trope heavy, right? They're very formulaic.
Yeah.
You have if you hit all these different boxes, people are going to watch it whether or not it's actually good or not, because that audience just wants that fantasy. It's kind of the Harlequin, romance novel, in a 2 hour small chunk. Well, hour and a half if
Sure.
you put commercials in. So that was the beginning. And then we got streaming. And when streaming came out, and again, it's cheap, it's easy to make, and you don't have to put too much effort into it, and the intended audience eats it up, whether it's good or bad. So that streaming also oversaturates the genre. On top of that, because of the very low quality, it drives down, and to the point where even talking about rom-coms now makes it extreme. People have more bad memories of rom-coms than they have good memories. So it has a
Yeah.
tendency
It's
to dilute and make sure that no one wants another rom-com.
It's the golden corral of movies at this point.
That's true.
You don't remember anything good you had there. You just remember you overfed.
That's true.
That's it.
And another thing that I think really hurt rom-coms is the fact that we don't have that there was a dwindling of rom-com teams. Like Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. You put those two together, you got dynamite. Cary Grant and Cary Grant and any leading female, to be honest, but just having that good chemistry between actors that is reliable. With the '90s, we had Meg Ryan and in Tom Hanks. They were easy to kind of put together. Julia Roberts, Richard Gere. You put those two together, you got something good.
Well, now, I mean, you're right. We have a lot less of that, but I'd say the current generation, well, I guess they're done at this point, would be Gosling and Stone. They had that going on. A couple different movies that they did together, two or three different movies, so they had that, but you're right. We used to recognize those pairings right away, but I think that would have been the latest generation of that.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying. It could be that Gosling and Stone could still pull it off. I think that they've been in 3 movies together. One of which was not a rom com, Gangster Squad. I'm sorry, that was never going to be
No,
the
but they were
rom-com.
that classic pairing.
Yeah.
That's what they were trying to do. That, like what you were talking about with Cary Grant. Like bring them in different kind of movies. There's a drama they're in. There's a couple rom-coms they're in, that kind of thing. So
Hmm.
it's just now there's too many opportunities. There's too many eyeballs. There's too many streaming platforms, movie platforms, TV platforms, all of that. So it's almost impossible to do that with
Yeah.
people anymore. And instead, it's just tentpole movies where you see the same people in them every time.
And another one that's kind of a spin-off of the dwindling rom-com teams that we need to bring up is we have the bad pairings. We have the Stewart and Pattinson. We have the Dornan and
Right.
I'm
No
sorry.
chemistry.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
no
no
chemistry. And the
chemistry.
thing is that they don't even really not necessarily no chemistry, but you kind of feel like they don't even want to be in the same scene or in the same movie with each other.
Yeah.
And so that not only is it's a vacuum, and it sucks out all the joy and all the fun. Like even like with the Lifetime movies and the Hallmark movies, you at least get the sense that they're enjoying each other's company,
Right.
which is a lot more than you can say for those types of movies where um, there's just absolutely a void of any kind of interesting chemistry. And chemistry, I think, um, obviously it's very important for a rom com, but it's very interesting that romances now in movies are changed, and there's especially in the 21st century there's a change in romance and a change in relations between men and women that is very difficult to nail down in a
Well, some of
romantic
it's
comedy.
because we know too much about them. We know too much about the stars now. We all have their social media feeds that we can look through while we're watching the movie in the theaters. We know who they're with. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, we believed that Cary Grant was in love with that woman. We didn't know who his wife was.
Hmm.
Nobody saw pictures of the Oscars back then. Not general people. The general public didn't see pictures. They didn't see 30 different angles of a person's dress
Hmm.
within an hour after they walked down the red carpet, let alone a week or a year. They didn't know Cary Grant wasn't in love with that woman they saw a movie in a year ago. They don't know anything about them. They didn't go on talk shows, 5 different ones in one week, to pimp out their movie. So, and we can't suspend reality anymore and believe that they're really falling in love. People used to think they were really in love.
Hmm.
People bought it. They saw them on a big screen while they were sitting inside of their car. They were sitting,
Hmm.
2 football fields away watching this movie. They thought they were falling in love with that person. They didn't have their Insta feed, scrolling through on their phone going, oh, they're not into that. She's into this guy and this guy, and a lot of the information that we have in front of us now, it doesn't help us suspend belief. There's a reason why we have to, why superhero movies are the biggest thing, because they're so out of touch with reality. We're like, oh, we suspend our belief at the beginning of the movie. You can't have a realistic movie where people fall in love anymore if we haven't seen in the tabloids, hey, they left their wife for that actor while making that movie. That's why people like Jennifer and Ben. That's why they
Hmm.
like those, because they found out, oh, they did leave their spouses for them. That's why they like Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. Oh, their marriages fell apart because they met each other for their movies. And when that happened, they made more movies together
Hmm.
because they realized people want to buy in to not only the characters, but the people really liking and loving each other.
And especially with the social media 24/7 with like right now we have Tom Holland and Zendaya, with the second the second recurrence of Ben and Jen. um, do you think so not only are you saying that that's kind of has an impact on rom-coms, but do you think that that has also kind of a negative affect or negative impact on just relationships and kind of expectations of relationships?
Yeah, I mean, it has to, because they're performing all the time.
Hmm.
It's constant performing. I mean, they have that to live up to now, so they don't want to let people down in that. It puts more pressure on making that relationship work, and then they're in front of the cameras constantly. So they can't get away. and that's our fault for feeding into it as much as it is for their fault for saying to their publicist, hey, let them know I'm going to eat here tomorrow. So, it's we're all monsters and garbage people. We should just admit it.
Well, I honestly try my hardest not to pay attention to things. It's all.
But we have podcasts talking about movies, so
That's
we're
true.
part of the problem.
Oh, I mean, I like talking about the movies themselves more than
I
the
know.
personalities
I'm just
outside.
saying it all feeds itself,
know.
and we just all have to admit we play a part. But some of the greatest, I think some of the greatest actors that we have are the people that we never hear from.
That's true.
Like George Clooney, for the most part. I mean, he shares his opinion every once in a while, but for the most part, he pops out when he does something really cool or makes something really cool, and then he disappears. If it wasn't for alcohol, we wouldn't know anything about Mel Gibson. Except they make great movies. If it wasn't for alcohol, all we go is, wow, he makes really, really great movies. Oh, Mel.
Oh, yes. But let's... And the other thing is like Mel Gibson has 3 movies out or about to come out within the next I think he has 3 movies coming out in 3 months, and actually one of them actually looks quite interesting of all things, but yeah,
if he's the guy making it, it's awesome. I mean, don't let him make a phone call, but let him make a movie.
Don't let him make a beer run. Let's put it that way. Yeah, so I to me, I feel like there is a de-evolution. But here's my question to you, though. Is it possible for us to get back? Is there a resurgence in the rom-com possible in today's age? Or is this a bygone era? Is this the...
I mean, there's some good ones floating out there. The last couple years, I think a lot of dreck has been made just while we're in COVID. Rom-coms are even cheaper to crank out. And Hallmark had 100 new movies at Christmas time. Mm-hmm. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the one I recommend everybody see is Andy Samberg made Palm Springs, came out in 2020. Mm-hmm. They made it right before the pandy hit. It came out during it. It still is a sleeper movie that not that many people saw. It knows what it's doing. It's Groundhog, and it's a rom-com. Mm-hmm. It knows exactly what it's making, but it did both of them perfectly well. It's a perfect rom-com. Guys are going to love it. Women are going to love it. It has a little bit of a dorky-looking guy, a little bit of a dorky-looking woman. Nobody is super shiny in it. J.K. Simmons is great in it. It's a great movie, so check out Palm Springs. There are good rom-coms being made, and they're squeaking through. I think, it's just the genre's changed. It's just where are you going to find romantic comedy? I think animated romantic comedies, or some of that is where it's at right now. Mm-hmm. Big Mouth is a cartoon that's a vulgar cartoon made about preteens and teens having sex on Netflix. But if you look at it in the genre of a rom-com, they nail it. They completely nail it. So I think it's where do you find good rom-coms now? It's not maybe in a theater, an hour and a half movie and a popcorn flick, but you're going to find it. I always look for good creators. As long as it's a good creator, mm-hmm. I think you can find that kind of thing. Ivan Reitman's son makes great movies, So I would look up Palm Springs if you're looking for the raunchy romance stuff that your girlfriend's going to laugh at and you're going to laugh at too because you got a gutter sense of humor. Then go Big Mouth. There's options.
Well, I will say that there is actually one movie that's still in theaters that is a rom-com, and that was actually one of my favorite films of the year last year. Licorice Pizza, Paul Thomas Anderson's new film. Right.
But that's it's still kind of genre. I mean, there's a lot of people that can't get into his movies, and I agree, good movie. But if I just try to steer people to something that seems like a little more, the classic rom-com. But you're right, that's a great movie as well. What's the new one? Red Rock? No, Rocket.
Not Red Rocket. That is not a rom-com.
What's the that's the new movie, right? With Rex.
Yeah. That's not rom-com. That's
they're very much trying to make that. I would say that would be an edgy indie rom com. I would argue with you for that one. I would argue with you for that one. I would.
Okay, I mean, I will say this right now. I might have a hate thing going on for Sean Baker.
Okay.
So maybe I'm just have an anti bias
Look,
towards him on that one, but
I think rom-com's a spectrum. I think it definitely has a lot of the tropes that come along with the rom-com. It just has a lot of other stuff in there too. But you can definitely pick out the thread of that's where that movie came from. It's just that, ever-changing genre kind of thing.
So here, I guess my last question is this: when it comes to the future of rom-coms, is it in kind of going back to basics, or do you think that we're going to see a new evolution in the rom com? Is it going? Are we going to see something kind of like a? I'm going to go with this just because I feel like this is the trend that we're starting to see coming out, but the euphoria of rom coms, where it's a little bit more
Well,
edgier, hipper.
yeah, I think that's what it's going to be. It's going to be the more of a, oh, would you call that a rom-com like we were just talking about? But they're trying to make a new rom-com. J-Lo's got a new one coming out with Owen
Well,
Wilson.
it just came
Looks
out.
like hot garbage. Looks like hot garbage. It's definitely a classic rom-com. It's a 90s, early 2000s rom-com. They're still making
It
them.
reminds me of those
And
old Gold Circle
yeah,
rom coms. You know,
I think it's going to fail, and I think it's going to be just junk. But they're still going to give it a try. I just think it's kind of been done. They're just going to have to. It's going to have to be something where somebody like a Kevin Smith or Woody Allen's going to have to fix that genre and just kind of repoint it in the next generation. But we've already grounded it. We've already made it raunchier. So the question is, how are you going to go? And I think it's from genre bending, like the Andy Samberg movie did, where it's like, look, let's take Groundhog Day, let's take some romance, let's put those together.
mm-hmm.
Really great movie. I think that's where we're going to see rom-coms go, is sci-fi, romance, and comedy, or like we've seen action, and the bromance is still going. I mean, Kevin Hart and The Rock aren't going to stop making rom-coms. They make them with each other every year.
That's true.
So
I'm actually going to go in a different direction, and I think that what we're going to see as the next trend in rom coms, and I'm actually quite excited to see if someone can actually do this, which is gender fluidity rom coms. That I mean, because that is something that is being more acceptable and more that people are kind of are opening themselves up to. That it seems like rom coms have always been kind of binary, in the sense that it's usually about either a straight couple, or in a couple of instances a gay couple. But I feel like gender fluidity and openness to new relationship types and styles is.
well, I mean, we had threesome in the late 90s. Was it 2000 or 90s? I think it was the 90s. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to happen. The thing is, the reason we're never going to have another great rom-com isn't because it's going to change, and isn't going to be because people aren't going to accept gender fluidity and all of this stuff. It's just because there's very few movies that everybody sees anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't have a Marvel stamp on them, or a Disney stamp on them, maybe DC, hit and miss. But I think that we're never gonna. I think Love Actually was the last giant rom-com. It wasn't just because it was the epitome of all the things good and bad with it. I mean, Crazy Stupid Love was a great classic style rom-com, but not as many people saw that. Every year, less people see genre movies. And I think that's our biggest problem. It isn't that rom-coms are changing. It's that whatever the evolution is, a fraction of people are going to see it. Where before, everybody saw it. Everybody saw Titanic. Everybody saw Sleepless in Seattle. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. Some people will catch it, And there's also the fact that appointment television doesn't happen anymore. I've talked to people that say they love Hallmark movies. My mother loves Hallmark movies. She doesn't pay attention to those movies.
Yeah,
They're
they're supposed
on
to be
while
on
she's
the.
scrolling a tablet,
Yeah.
and then she'll look up at the end and go, like 5 minutes before the end, she goes, "Oh, I remember this one. It's Law and Order now." It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is what's keeping rom-coms from being great. It's not that they're formulaic. We love formulaic stuff. Every Marvel movie's formulaic. We all paid the ticket price. It's just that there's so much else to watch and there's so much else to do that it's just a check mark on a list now.
Excellent. And that should be the final word, to be honest. All right. So, Christian, where can people find you on the internet? Anything you want to bring up?
They could find we took a kind of big break due to the pandy and a little 2 week stint I did in the ICU after a major motorcycle accident last year. But you can find me at Dad Does Rom-Coms. You can watch me fail at sewing at Dad Sews and see me 70 pounds heavier than I was before that motorcycle accident last year. And look at the nice svelte me here on this stream. So yeah, Dad Sews, Dad Does Rom-Coms, Christian Lee. You can find me online.
Right.
Have at it.
And of course, you know where to find us here at Monday Night Movie Talk. We're on YouTube under the Art House Legends channel. You can also find me on Twitch at MovieDude _Eric. Obviously, the Art House Legends Facebook page as well. Like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. I am starting some new gaming streams. Those that were here about a week ago, y'all saw me fail spectacularly at Planet Zoo. I intend to keep at it and trying to build that epic zoo of my dreams. I've also been challenged to play the Dark Pictures anthology of horror games by a former guest on the show. And so I might be taking up that challenge pretty soon as well. But clearly, my heart is in the movies. So we're going to keep talking about movies. We got the Oscars coming up pretty soon. If y'all didn't get a chance to see my reaction to the nominations, the video is up. Please feel free to check it out. If you have a difference of opinion, we welcome differences of opinion all the time here at Monday Night Movie Talk. Please just make sure that you keep it relatively clean. Try to show a little sympathy and empathy to all us fellow movie people out here on the internet. But honestly, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Christian, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation about rom-coms.
Always a pleasure, man.
And at this point, are there any last words before we close this out?
And just make more movies.
I agree to that. All right. This is the Movie Dude, Eric. You were here for Monday Night Movie Talk. Have a great night. I'll see you back here next week.